Hello, dear colleagues. The results of the research of the team of authors of the Bohdan Khmelnytsky National University of Cherkasy are presented to your attention. Assessment of ecological and economic competitiveness of regions using factor analysis. The current stage of development of the regional economy, both in the world and in Ukraine, requires active research by scientists. This is primarily due to increased interregional, national, and global competition. Recently, the vector of development of economic systems is focused on the environmental component. This contributes to the formation of a new type of regional competitiveness. The importance of the environmental component of competitiveness can be proven by the results of real environmental disasters. When the importance of all the major and related subsystems was eliminated, ecological and economic competitiveness of regions is a consequence of sustainable development with the world economic system. Therefore, there is an urgent need to increase the economic and social efficiency of market transformation, taking into account changes in the level of development of innovation, production and economic potential of the regions, and compliance with modern environmental and economic challenges. Thus, increasing the ecological and economic competitiveness of regions is of renewed importance related to adjusting the priorities of regional economy management, supporting small and medium-sized businesses due to decentralization of the economy, and forming and developing a new market architecture that is informational and ecologically economic. It's important to recognize and take into account, along with interests of business, environmental and economic interests of the population of the regions. Ecological and economic directions of regional development are formed and concretized at the state level, substantiated in the legal framework, instructional documents, which regulate the purpose, objectives, principles, and sequence of directions of greening economic processes, and creating a system of environmental security. Thus, the resolution of the International Environmental Forum, Environment for Ukraine, contains proposals for a policy of balanced environmental and economic development, which provides for strengthening the role of regions in its development and implementation. Ensuring the environmental component of economic development is different in each state and corresponds to the strategy and scenarios of its development, which depends on the social, economic, demographic, environmental characteristics of development. The authors analyzed the results of research by a number of foreign authors. The issue of regional competitiveness is relevant. It is of great interest. Scientists use a variety of approaches and research methods. The article proposes models of ecological and economic competitiveness, with the help of which the actual ecological and economic competitiveness of regions is assessed and their rating is obtained. Factor analysis was used to determine the most important indicators and their weight. The authors propose to take into account the rate of atmospheric rent when determining competitiveness. So, ecological and economic competitiveness of the territory is formed from groups of components, some of which will determine its basic potential, others the potential of possible development trajectories. The ratio of these components is different for each region and in each period of time when competitiveness is determined. Factor analysis was chosen by us as a research method. It combines methods for estimating the dimension of a set of variables by studying the structure of correlations and covariance matrices. Factor analysis assumes that the correlations between a large number of variables under study are determined by the existence of variables that were not included in the observation and which are smaller in number. Practical implementation of the factor model allows to adequately calculate the covariance structure between a relatively large numbers of observed variables due to fewer simple factors, which simplifies data analysis. The assessment of the degree of applicability of factor analysis to a given sample was performed using the Kaiser-Meyer-Olkin sample adequacy criterion. To conduct a factor analysis of the following sequence of actions was built and implemented. The last action is formulated for a specific task for our study. The following initial facts were selected to study the ecological and economic competitiveness of the regions, taking into account the groups of indicators and coefficients that reflect the ecological, economic competitiveness, social, human factor, and the introduction of atmospheric rent. There were analyzed 465 values in total, given the symmetry of the cross-correlation matrix and without taking into account the units on the main diagonal of the matrix. It had 289 positive elements out of 465 elements in total, which is satisfactory for the analysis. The value of the Kaiser-Meyer-Olkin test is 0.89, which indicates the high adequacy of the sample to factor analysis. The number of factors was determined by the number of eigenvalues of the matrix of cross-correlations greater than 1. Based on this, it was concluded that there are 7 factors. Table 1 shows the first 10 eigenvalues sorted in descending order, together with the percentage of data variation due to the relevant factor. As can be seen from Table 1, together the first 7 factors explain 86.5% of variations in all data, which is a high figure. After factorization of the cross-correlation matrix and rotation of the factorized matrix, only indicators with a load value greater than 0.7 were selected from the resulting matrix. The result of the calculations is presented in Table 2. Of the 7 predetermined factors, only 6 are applicable. As for the last 7th factor, there are no indicators with a high value of load. In total, the factors include 19 indicators, which reduces the amount of data processed in the process of assessing environmental and economic competitiveness. Among the selected indicators, 7 belong to the economic group of indicators, 4 to the group of social indicators, the remaining 8 to the group of environmental indicators. The first factor, which covers 9 indicators at once, deserves attention. 1 from the group of economic indicators, 2 from the group of social indicators, 6 from the group of environmental indicators. Given that the first factor explains almost 34% of the variation in the data, the indicators of this share have the most significant impact on the system as a whole, and therefore will be the most important indicators for assessing environmental and economic competitiveness. Note that the value of atmospheric rent belongs to the indicators of factor 1. The conducted factor analysis allowed to identify the most important indicators and determine the weight of individual groups of indicators, which was taken into account for the development of models for refined assessment of environmental and economic competitiveness. To assess ecological and economic competitiveness, there were used 2 models which differently take into account the obtained values of the load of factors and the percentage of variations explained by factors. Model 2 is additive, which also takes into account the load of indicators and the share of data variation explained by factors. By its nature, the second model is more like an expert assessment of environmental and economic competitiveness. Table 3 summarizes the values of environmental and economic competitiveness estimates obtained using the described models and the corresponding ranks of the regions. Analysis of assessments of ecological and economic competitiveness of regions allows us to conclude that first, the result is stable because for 12 regions out of 22 ranks obtained by different models differ by no more than 3 points. Secondly, the comparison of the results of the built models with the average value of the competitiveness index shows greater similarity of the results of model 2 and is explained by the higher accuracy of the model by choosing the indicators that carry the greatest load. According to the results of the study using factor analysis, 7 groups of indicators were identified that most significantly affect the assessment of environmental and economic competitiveness and are the basis for its assessment. The identified indicators can be decisive for the development of regional and state development strategy, environmental and economic component. The authors propose an introduction to the indicators of assessing the competitiveness of the regions of the value of atmospheric rent. Atmospheric rent is a fiscal level of influence and a stimulus for the formation of ecological and economic competitiveness of the region. The factor analysis confirmed that the value of atmospheric current is a significant indicator that belongs to the first most important group of indicators and therefore should be taken into account when conducting environmental and economic assessment. To study the ecological and economic competitiveness, two models were built and the results of modeling were compared. The most accurate model turned out to be additive, which is explained by a more balanced consideration of the load of indicators, and the share of explained variation of data by each of the factors. The assessment of ecological and economic competitiveness was carried out on the example of regions of Ukraine, and the ranks of these regions were determined. The proposed methodology can be used to assess the environmental and economic competitiveness of regions for any country in the world. Thank you for your attention.